It's a rusting shithole in the sump of our rotting habitat where we hide in the dark from the worst aspects of our own kind. And it's where the future of the human race is going to start. I'm Eddie Webb.
And I'm Chris Spivey.
And today we do the final part of Brink, Book 1. I know I pick good music when 3 episodes in, I can still see you bobbing your head to it when I play it. So.
Or the fact that I specifically waited to the laser beam before I sip my coffee so I wouldn't miss it.
Yes. You just gotta make sure you're completely present for the laser beam.
It's the same reason why I loved like the Daleks Exterminate when they used to have like a little sound to it when we were kids. When it would flash the screen black and white. Still loved it.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I love it. Yeah. Completely agree. But anyhow, so we are back to Brink. I'm just going to dive in because I'm sure we'll do overall Brink wrap up at the end. So I think let's dive in. Then we'll use the ends for kind of what our overall thoughts are. Last episode, Bridge was being tracked down by a bunch of amazingly dressed, masked hoodlum types. And then she slammed a button to turn off all the gravity and shoot them all out into space. Or to somewhere. Probably space.
No, Eddie. You're undercutting that. You said she slammed a button. She didn't slam a button.
She shot a button.
With her keen eye and expert aim.
Yes. As a note, something I forgot to mention last time, I noticed it when I was just recapping, is that when she says, I'll find somewhere before she shoots the node, she actually is wrapping her hand around a wire or something next to a wall before she fires that. So like again, like the small details that upon rereading, you see there's even more thought and structure going into it, which I just really love.
Yeah. And it shows you that she's always planning, which is something I love as a planner.
Yeah, she's definitely thinking. Yeah, put a pin in that. We'll come back to that in a minute. So she manages to grab and climb away up a ladder. Well, yeah.
We discussed the concept of controlled chaos. Right now, Bridge is a perfect example of controlled chaos. There's nothing but chaos ever around her, but there's still like a through line of control going towards a point. I just want to bring that up and just to discuss our relationship right there for you. That's what controlled chaos is.
So I am the bridge in our relationship is what you're saying?
You're like that line. You're the wrapping your arm around the wire so you don't float off into space. I am the explosion that makes the space happen.
That does realize that makes you Brinkman, right?
That's okay. Because he comes back.
Totally. He does. We've seen him already, right? So she manages to climb her way actually down a ladder and into the grav normal zone where she then falls, which is again a neat touch because they show her climbing from the top of the panel to the bottom of the panel, which kind of implies what's going on. But then you see her fall, so like the motion follows naturally, but actually sells the fact that she's quote unquote climbing down, which is something visually orienting in zero gravity in comics can sometimes be hard to come across. Now, I really like how that's done.
Yeah. It gave me a lot of flashes of Spider-Man, actually, and how Spider-Man sort of goes up and down the walls and from side to side.
Oh, yeah, it's a good point. I hadn't thought about that. You're right. It does kind of have inklings of the Spider-Man crawling down a wall thing. And so Adler calls out her name, and she pulls a gun on him for realizing who he is. And again, little neat touch is in his right hand, there's a little glowing blue bar, and right hands tend to be where the tracelets are. So it's another small way of showing the tracelet has a torch or a flashlight function on it, which is, again, very, very cool. And of course, it's blue, and all the colors are blue on the page.
I want one of these.
Yeah, no, the tracelets are awesome.
Now, they're no Pit Boy Emily because of the bulkiness of the Pit Boy, but something about that I love. But I'm loving the concept of the tracelet.
Sure, I mean the Pit Boy has the retro cool tech. It's the when tech was big and chunky and had 3 or 4 uses. That's a different kind of cool. Um, and so she's like, "Hey, Adler, what are you doing here?" And he's like, "I'm saving your life," because it turns out that a large chunk of the habitat has gone up in a riot, and he took cover down here. Um, and she says, "No, it's crap. You're lying to me." And she points the gun in his face. Uh, which again, to your point, like Bridge is always thinking. She's always analyzing, and to be fair, getting a little paranoid at this point, with justifiable reason. So he admits he was watching on a rigged security cam, and basically says that we shelter down here when things get rough. And he clarifies that's normal people who aren't on the out of their minds on nudge or who aren't twisted by the cults. So everybody else, uh, uh, they actually tend to hide out in the infrastructure of the habitat.
Which is a super cool little tidbit to add in, and feels very Babylon 5, actually.
Yeah, there's a lot of this is kind of the gray sector, Babylon 5 vibes.
And I know you're about to get to it, but something that I love specifically is like she's sort of in a hoodie and he's in a coat,
Mm-hmm.
and you can see the breath that they're breathing out in one of the panels to show you that it's significantly colder there than it was where she was before.
Yeah, and interestingly, the breath is so. We haven't talked too much about Ian's art lately, but Ian uses a fairly strong black outline on all of his work. Um, Again, slightly more traditional. We talked before with flat colors and whatnot. So everything looks like it was inked traditionally in some way, although obviously there's a lot of computer stuff going on with it. The breath is not done that way. The breath is just kind of an effect placed in front of their mouths, which actually reads more accurately because if it had been drawn out, it would have seemed like weird and odd. But because it's just a little puff of white on the page done with like a computer, like a spray can feature or whatever in Photoshop,
Yeah.
it reads more accurate. So again, small touch that really, really works.
And that blue, because we've been like drowning in blue and black, and the red contrast when he opens that garage door, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, spectacular.
Yes, yes, and then all the panels after that are all red lit because they're inside of a small room that has red lighting. And yeah, Bob Adler introduces them to Anish Anur, who turns out is a drive designer, one of the best Starship Drive designers in the universe, I suppose now. Although
Side
he
note,
clarifies was.
and we have nothing but side notes for our podcast.
Yes.
If my last name was Adler, at no point in time would I let anyone call me Bob. Like it would always be Robert Adler, a doctor,
Right,
professor,
right.
Robert, Supreme Commander Robert Adler. Bob Adler, come on.
Right.
That's
right.
it. Nothing pertinent. Just
Yeah.
Bob.
I probably wouldn't get that haircut either, but neither here nor there. But Bridge recognizes the name because Adler talked about Anish Noor in his seminars online that she watched way back. We talked about like 40, 50 pages ago. Now, interestingly, I think Noor's name was kind of just mentioned in passing. It was like buried into some of the stuff. So like, it was a small detail that we're now picking up here. It wasn't like we didn't see Anish's face or anything. So this is quote unquote out of the blue, but it's not a surprise to Bridge. So it's an interesting way of balancing. It's not quite a Playfair mystery in that regard, like because it's yes, we could have possibly picked this, but not really. But also Anish being here is not necessarily the point. There's a larger point that is more, I think, accurate to the mystery structure, which is why this is all happening.
So I don't know. I think I would consider it a Playfair because if I remember right, when Bridge was going through all those like video recordings essentially and essays, there were a ton of them, like a lot of them.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
And so for her to have pointed out that one specific thing and for it to have been there for us as a reader showed it had significance. So it's
Fair,
built in,
but
and the fact that Bridge, and as a quick segue, the fact that Bridge remembers it here specifically also shows the amount of detail and attention she must have paid in what could I imagine be hundreds of hours of boring seminars.
but that's a fair point. I guess my pushback on I'm rethinking it now, is that in comics specifically, there's kind of an unstated rule that a character is not properly introduced until you see them in some way. Um, and so, so from a mystery structure, introducing a character this late into the story is not considered to be done. You should have all of your significant cast, introduced by roughly halfway through. But to your point, he was technically introduced earlier through dialogue and reference. We didn't see him, so I think maybe I was like, "No, it's a bit unfair because we didn't see him before." But maybe that's not a fair assessment, right? Because and again, there's a minor mystery, right? Like
Yeah.
the larger point that we're going to get to here in a minute is something you could have put together pretty easily. Anish being here is a bit meant to be a bit of a surprise, but also, yeah, again, let's see how close is Abnett playing with the actual mystery structure here is a bit interesting.
Well, bringing up the comic perspective of it, I can see what you're saying because it's like when they first introduced Apocalypse in
Right,
Shadow. Apocalypse was the owl, and then when
right,
they properly introduced it, actually could see Apocalypse. He was not the owl.
right, right. So maybe that's why is that because I know that for comics that have a less consistent creative team, those moments are used for bait and switch moments, and so I don't consider it to be more accurate. But that's not fair because this is a very different structure, and also obviously by design a very consistent creative team. So that's not an issue. They can do these long term things, and also to another point, which I'll get to in a minute, there are going to be references in here that I now know pay off in future books, but will not pay
Mm.
off within this book. So then it comes: is the mystery Brink as a total series or Brink as a individual book as it's laid out here? So that's another interesting debate.
The best kind is both.
True, true. And I will say that this is a fairly in and of itself. Well, we'll get to the ending. We'll get to the ending. Let's jump ahead yet. Um. But anyway. Uh. Anur is the mystery I keep referencing is like Anur is actually part of a project to create a migration. That before Adler was saying it was possible, the corporation want to do it, and everyone kept saying no, that's not feasible. Anur has developed a drive that makes it feasible, and that's the quote unquote twist, which is not a huge surprise. It's like the surprise part is a that Adler was not just a crackpot, but was actually sincere and had a plan. But I think the bigger shock is that when Bridge was watching all of that stuff, Brink was kind of painting her as becoming obsessive and going down a rabbit hole that was irrelevant. And it turns out, no, it's all connected. And Bridge was actually not ahead of the game, but more on top of the game than anybody around her was giving her credit for.
Yeah. I am also
Um,
loving the fact, though, that it's just not all white dudes that we're getting in this
yeah,
story.
yeah. It's and also like little things like Anur has little circles on his templates, which imply another kind of technology. Um, and also, most of the smart characters tend to be people of color, and we're going to see even more another person of color down the road here in a minute. So, like, yeah, you're right. It's great that they're showing the diversity of humanity in this comic.
Mm-hmm. And making them all complex to boot.
Right? Yeah, they're not stereotypes. Um, so Anur introduces his drive prototype called Kali, where he talks about she was the goddess of empowerment, and Bridge is like, I thought she was a goddess of destruction, and they talk a bit about the nuances of Kali and a religion, which is a wild segue into all this comic, but still relevant to the overall themes of humanity winning crisis. Ultimately, finds use religion as a template as a way to kind of make sense of chaos. Whereas the cults are doing that in an extremely negative way. He's trying to point out that this is a more positive way. But what's interesting is that we then get a bit of a debate because Anish wants to emphasize the empowerment side of Kali, and Adler is a little more focused on the destruction side. They're both relevant to their overall plan, which is that some people may have to die for the migration to work. But Adler's a little more okay with that cost, whereas Anish is not.
So I've got an array of thoughts,
Mhm.
and one of which is the fact that you would not expect Brink to break down into a religious debate about the different aspects of Kali, for one.
Mhm.
Two, Bridge knew that. Like,
Yeah.
there was hard stop. And I know everyone will say today, if you're thinking about it, of course, everyone knows who Kali is, but you're thinking of present day Earth, not like Earth 400 years in the future
Right. I mean, she has a
with
moment
different
where
knowledge
she
bases.
mishears it and she's like, "Callie?" And it's no, Collie, which is it's very hard to pull off a sound gag in printed text, and so again, that's also pretty clever. But then it's not that she's ignorant of Collie, she just misheard. Um, and then of course because it's Bridge, and she's like, "Real a real upbeat name for your project." Just can't not be a sarcastic asshole, which I love.
The other thing, the last one for me, is being a student of history and hearing someone talk about like the Great Migration essentially
Mhm.
echoes back to two or three different specific events, and that is intriguing, but also I am a bit hesitant on how this writer could potentially handle those implications. But that's me bringing my own historical context to it.
Totally. One thing I like about this at this point in the comic is that um, th- they're bringing up really valid points, which is that the Brink as a place is not sustainable. Humanity will die out. They're saying 2 generations. Adler feels it's more aggressive, maybe 40, 50 years. But the point is that this is not sustainable. And the only reason why no alternatives are being seen is because the corporations are basically strip mining people functionally. They're exploiting them until they no longer exist. Um, and obviously, that's not a good answer. So they bring up what is ostensibly a very clear and obvious answer, which is we just go someplace else and settle on a planet. But then the creative team starts to muddy the waters almost immediately because before it's like it's not even viable, and that's where they muddy the waters. Now it's like, okay, now it's viable. Within a page, it becomes, and here are all the problems and complications around that. And so you're right, like they don't talk about the problems with migrations, but certainly hint at them because, like you said, there's more than a little. Some people are going to die, and we're okay with that because some people living is better than no people living. And when people start treating and which brings up the corporations are treating people like numbers, and you are also treating people like numbers, even though your numbers are trending slightly higher. There's there, it's still treating people like a logistics problem and not like people. And Bridge is the only person the conversation seems to be like at least moderately involved in. But these are people, right? You know,
And Bridge also brings up the other point that I would bring up is who gets to decide which people live and die, because
right?
then you're going to
Yep.
go for like your societal structures, and we know we have a fairly certain idea of who the people are going to be left behind are.
Right. Right. I see your point though that having people of at least one person of color start to have that conversation is a little awkward, but um, to Adler's credit, at no point they're saying we know exactly who's going to live or stay. Adler and Anish are arguing this very point actually in front of Bridge, um, and then they talk about the all of the sex stuff, and Adler's still convinced that it is. I'm sorry, Adler's convinced there's something there because it's basically this idea of a space god is embedded in the collective imagination, and so many people believe in it. Which again, in the middle of a conversation about Kali, is itself an interesting statement. Bridge still feels like it's. mass psychosis. And Adler's like, you're right, because we've gone mad. These are not incompatible concepts. Is that it can be mass psychosis and still a huge problem. Um, and then Anish makes a comment about weird life, and then Adler cuts him off. Spoiler: we will not talk about weird life again in book one. But we're already getting little seeds for future installments. And so and Anish has a great line because again, Bridge being pragmatic is like, does it actually work? And Anish is like, it's entirely simulated, but yes, it works if we get capital backing from one of the corporations.
Oh god.
But then yes, it's they continue on the conversation. The conversation goes for several pages. But one of the other nuances is Anish kind of talks down the Bridge a little, which is interesting because again, we so far presented Anish as relatively benevolent scientist type, and he's doing the benevolent scientist problematic trope of I have given you the logic, but you can't see you can't follow through that logic. And the fact that she's the only woman in the scene he's saying this to, I don't think that's problematic in the name of the writer. I think that's showing that Niche has his own flaws, and because he can't be, he thinks the only reason why Bridget is not agreeing is because she doesn't see the logic, and she's like, "No, I do," but and she's the one who brings up logistically not everyone can go, and brings up the very obvious problem with their plan. But anyway, so in the middle of this, Franny shows up. And she's like, "What is she doing here?" And Bridget's like, "What are you doing here?" And so Franny's like, "Are you okay? Because of the riots." And she's like, "Yes, you're part of this." And Franny, yes, Franny is part of this conspiracy, this migration, which is again not entirely surprising because she was the one that pointed out to Bridge the seminars in the first place. Yeah. And so she brought down food because the riot is so out of control with the sect overrunning everything. They've had to lock down the loop hatches, which again, no one will explain what it is, but implies that each loop in the habitat has a connector, and that's probably the things that have been shut down. And Franny gives her a hug because she's super worried about her.
So I like the idea of the implied riots. What I would have loved, though, is a scene or two of those riots, right, to reinforce it. And right, part of that's because as a reader, I'm much like Bridge, am paranoid now about what's going on for the story, for the character. Right. And so without having any of that context, I would take everything that I'm hearing here, as much as I may be enjoying it, as suspect from the Bridge perspective.
And that is actually what I like about it, is because I'm with you. The very first time I read it, I was like, this is a lot of tell don't show, which is surprisingly odd given the general quality of show don't tell in this comic. Yeah. But I realized upon this reread that you're right, we have absolutely no idea there actually is a riot. It's just these three people telling her this. And we have seen previously that Bridge is perfectly fine with playing along with people to get more information out of them.
Mm-hmm. And coupled with the fact that Adler started off when he saved Bridge with a lie.
Mm-hmm. Right. So Bridge is bringing up the fact that if this gets out of control, Habitat Security will just shut them down. And there'll be martial law, there'll be contingency plans. And she makes a passing reference to the mess in Sophia a year back. Very beginning of the comic, when Brink was trying to push for their old habitat, trying to push for this becoming an actual case, he also referenced the problems in Sophia last year. So again, there's a lot of they do a lot of world building of referencing things that everyone knows, but we as the reader don't actually know. Yeah, which I always love. And so she's like, civil society may collapse and people will get hurt. And Franny's like, good. That needs to happen. That they need to force the corporations out. And as long as there is something they can exploit, they will be here. If they no longer have anything to exploit, they will leave and allow us to actually do something. And so Bridge is like, you're basically wanting this place to descend to anarchy and people to get hurt. And Franny pulls a fucking gun.
I'm not going to give Brinkman a whole bunch, but right now Brinkman was right.
Yeah, no. Brink was like, this girl's weird, and Bridge was like, no, she's fine. Turns out she's weird.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens afterwards is interesting because immediately the three of them against Bridge are not on the same page. Adler wants her to put the gun away. And she's like, and Franny brings up the very valid point that Bridge is an investigator. She investigates, and she's also really, really good. And Franny's like, why she couldn't be down here by accident. Now, what Franny doesn't know is Bridge absolutely is down in this specific location by accident. But Franny has correctly seduced Bridge's skill level, but has incorrectly put together that it's all part of Bridge's plan.
Well, if we stop and look at the three of them, though, because I'm thinking about like what their classes would essentially be. Mm-hmm. You've got Bob, who's essentially like a mastermind or planner. You've got Inesh, who is essentially like the scientist or the person that executes the plan. And you've got Franny, who is kind of the grunt.
Right.
The grunt in the face, because she's friendly and she looks like the best fighter.
And what's interesting is that because at first this seems like it's way out of character for Franny, but it's really not, because everything we see from Franny is that she's very much emotion driven, gut driven. She goes by her instincts and what she thinks people are, and they generally prove her correct. And so she like immediately kind of suspected Brink, and what we thought was being disarmingly cute and kind of fluffy, turns out she was trying to diffuse Brink by kept calling him funny. She was trying to de-escalate that. So she's very emotionally intelligent, but also, as we find out here, more than a little paranoid. Which again, given where they're at, the fact that she's one of the few people who can, she's one of the front lines of getting people off of Nudge and onto good food to make them be part of this larger conspiracy. So she has a very valid reason for being paranoid, specifically of investigators. But she does make the classic bad guy mistake of, she's like, she knows too much, and then finds out in the middle of pointing a gun at Bridge that in fact Bob and Anish had not told her some details that Franny thought they had told her. Which therefore makes Bridge more suspicious. So if Franny had not pulled the gun, they would have actually gotten away with it. But because she pulled the gun because she thought Bridge knew too much, Bridge now in fact does know too much.
But part of the problem with her plan, though, is if they had told her the things that she said they were going to tell, that she thought they told them, Bridge wouldn't be sitting there calmly having talked to them. So that's where the little bit of a contrast is for me.
Right. And it kind of gets summarized in one panel is Franny saying, I think she's all smiles and friendly, but deep down she's thinking all the time, which you and I have already pointed out is true. And then Bridge saying, I am really good, but I never thought this crazy up. And that's the core conflict of this comic, right? Is that Bridge is a fantastic investigator, but she's not at this point ready to understand the scope of what is actually going on. Her investigator skills have not prepared her for, again, and we talked about the Mythos reference in the previous episode. This is very Call of Cthulhu in that regard. She is an excellent investigator in the mundane world and is just now taking her steps into this wider Mythos style universe, and she is not prepared for it.
Yeah.
And so she uh, they point out that Bridge still has her illicit gun on her that was repeatedly told to surrender to security services. She's not done. So she slowly puts it on the table. Um, and Franny says, I thought we'd taken steps to get you and Brink off the scent. I thought it worked. What with him being dead and everything? And Bridge is like finally realizes just how far gone Franny is.
Mm-hmm.
And Franny's like, if with Brink being killed, your stakes get stood down. No more investigating, and all that would have worked if Bridge had actually followed protocol and been stood down and talked to her caseworker and all of that. But because Bridge went off the grid, which at the time we thought was her getting too paranoid and freaked out, turns out no. Bridge was suspecting there may have been people leveraging HSD against her and was trying to stay away from that.
Both can be true.
Both can be true, fair, right? But it's not just that. Again, the comics done a really good job of never undercutting Bridge, but because we don't have Bridge's internal thought process, because there's no dialogue box, there's no thought bubbles, there's no narrator caption boxes. We don't always know what's going on in Bridge's head, and so we only find out later sometimes the reasons why she's doing everything. But to your point, right? Like she was talking to Brink, and she was like, "This is why you're telling me not to do these things, and this is why I'm gonna do all these things." It's the only time we saw kind of a glimpse into her internal thought processes. But then she saw Brink, even though he was dead, which makes it unreliable. And then actually comes back up. Is because, well, not quite yet. Anish and Adler try to talk Franny down because they really do want to advocate her, and she won't do it now that she knows what we've done. And so Bridge asks a lot of questions. What have you done? And she goes to a theory you had suspected, which is, are you fucking with the food supply?
Yep, makes human sense.
And immediately Adler's like, shh, no one say a fucking word. Everyone shut the fuck up.
Which goes back to him being like a planner mastermind. And like his real plan for even talking to her was to try to get a person inside of the HSD. So like his entire thing was thought out before and all methodically done.
Right.
Emotional people got to fuck up a plan.
Yeah. Yes, because Adler's like, we've got this on lock. We just know anything. Just shut up. And then Bridge keeps out loud figuring things out. And she's like, you're doctoring the supply to make everyone psychotic. And Franny just has to blab. She's so proud of herself. It's a psychoactive synthetic. And basically the food, what they put in the food interacts with nudge. So that's why it's not the two separate trends of keeping the food clean and also not taking nudge, but the two of them together are causing everyone to go crazy. And it is this group that is directly responsible for that.
They believe they're directly responsible.
Well, right. Which we get that in a second here. And so Adler's like, Franny, calm down. Give me the gun. And Bridge is like, yes, give him the gun. And so she does. And Bridge goes, thanks God. And then Adler points the gun at Bridge. And it's like, I didn't take it off of her because she's wrong. I'm taking it off her because she's too emotional and won't finish the job. Which, again, is another case of a man assuming a woman can't finish the job.
Yep.
But again, because obviously Bridge and Franny are written such complex characters, I continue to feel like it's not the creative team. It is very much, these are two sexist characters.
I see that.
But of course, Franny was like, gets really excited about watching Bridge get shot and killed. So Franny's not all there. And there's little things like they want her to take off the coat they gave her because they cost money.
Makes perfect sense, though.
Yeah.
Like we've already discussed that they need funding, so they don't have a lot of resources.
Again, little details. I just love it.
And the tarp they're putting down too. Oh.
Yeah. Gets the plastic sheeting. And then Bridge blows up the plan because they're like, so you're saying because you tainted the food and because they interact with Nudge, that's why people are seeing things. And like, yes, like, then why am I seeing Brink? And it's like, and Initia's like, wait a minute, what? And so Adler's like, shut up, this doesn't matter, get out of the way. But Inish has to know. And so he's interfering with Adler's shot. And it's like, you're not a Nudge, you've eaten only macro. It's like, yeah, just like I was told. So how come I'm seeing things? And then Anish puts up, it's not a mass hallucination. It's maybe unlocking people's ability to see something that's actually there.
Which talks about like his theories he was having before that obviously he was either outvoted or pushed aside with.
Right. And and Adler says, screw, she's not seeing ghosts. Bridge grabs Anish and says, I see them all the time. Adler tries to shoot through Anish. Franny freaks out and says, you hit him, you stupid asshole. So she tries to grab the gun, basically trying to shoot Bridge. Bridge shoots around Anish to kill Adler and points the gun at Franny to try to drop it. Bob tries to shoot her again. She shoots Bob again. And there's just blood everywhere. Like the panel's getting more and more bright red into it as this conflict goes on.
And so it is interesting though they chose to, like, when the bullets hit, to show like the feathers and stuff coming out of the coats in addition to the blood.
Yes.
A unique choice.
There's also a little bit where so Franny jumps Bridge, but then goes for the gun. And so both of the guns have a glowing orange chamber along the side. And when the guns are moving around rapidly, you start to see an orange blur line that follows the gun whenever it moves fast, which is a really cool way to show action lines in a comic without actually doing action lines, right? It allows you to see the motion of the gun in a way that is natural to the world itself. And again, these blur lines are not done with a hard black outline, so they're just kind of an effect put onto the screen. So again, a way to show action without, but it doesn't take you out of the world itself. And so the two of them shoot at each other. Franny gets shot in the chest. Bridge gets shot in the shoulder. And Franny falls over a guardrail and falls to the ground. And so everyone is dead except for Bridge, who is just coated in blood in the right side of her body.
So I think that Franny shot misses. The one that she's bleeding from is when Bob shot her earlier, because that's why like her entire shoulder is just all red from like the blood that's been coming out.
Oh no, you're right. Yeah, that is early. So that's my fault. You're right. Yeah. So yeah, Franny just misses. Yes, because now that I'm looking at it again, the panel where Bridge is shooting back, we do see at the very top a little ting as the bullet hits the. Yeah, you're right. So again, small details, and I missed that one actually.
Which means that Bob was right in the first place.
Yeah, that she can't do whether subconsciously or just because she's a bad shot, she couldn't actually kill her. Whereas, as we know for repeatedly, that Bridge is an excellent shot.
Yeah, kill anybody. I'm going to predict right now, if I can't tell if Franny lands on an icing down there, but if her body is not recovered, Franny comes back.
Okay. I will keep that in mind.
It's like superhero comics. There's no body. Well, you know what? Sometimes even if there's a body, this will come back.
Right. And so Bridge calls in HSD. And we immediately get dumped into a debrief with the head of the HSD at this habitat. And she asks how Anish is, and he is critical but stable. So he managed to survive. She asks the Hassan, who's the head of HSD here, if he's heard of Weird Life, which he hasn't. Again, that's only a reference we get to it. And it says that lab work has proven that there has been a synthetic psychoactive in 2 food processing plants. So that was the plan, and it matches the samples they found at the crime scene. Um, and so it's like, so it looks like you were right, and Brett's like, no, I was right. This is the case. And he's like, it's gonna take weeks to look at. And so she's like, so again, like just like last time, uh, when Brink was adamant about the case, Bridge was hesitant. But when Bridge thought she had something, she did say, no, this is what's going on. And that was the last time she had this conversation when she was like put on suspension. She's like, no, here's the case. So Bridge is someone who doesn't feel this strongly unless she genuinely feels like she has the pieces. And she gets frustrated with bureaucracy. But the counterpoint to Brink, she doesn't like to push ahead if she isn't sure of her facts. Whereas Brink is happy to just shove ahead when he even has an inkling he thinks he knows what's going on.
But we also know that she's willing to go off board to find out if her facts are accurate or not to run down the case.
Right. And then she meets Bonner from review.
I don't think Brink would have done. I think Brink would be too concerned about losing his job and be like, all right, I won't do it. Fuck you, yes. But I won't do it.
Which goes back to the conversation earlier where she's like, when she was talking to Brink and she's like, you would tell me how to do all this stuff. Which, again, without all of this context, can read as you're the sensible partner. You would talk to me about doing all this crazy shit. But since we have no more and more about both Bridge and Brink, even though he's dead at this point in time, it's like, no, she probably talked about it because he would have been more concerned about his job than getting the case closed, whereas she's much concerned about the case closed.
Yep. That's a good contrast.
Mm-hmm. So then Hassan leaves, and she's once again meets Bonner from review. We saw Bonner very briefly when he was calling her Tracelet to get her to talk about the debrief so she can go through the review process. And he talks about he's a little more sanguine in the sense that clearly Adler and Lightman were key actors, looking into their links to the sect, and it could be this thing that breaks out into a massive case. And Bridge is like, okay, yeah, sure, but what's the downside, obviously? And it's like, you were on suspension, you weren't cooperating with the injury, we believe you have obtained an unregistered firearm, which is interesting. It means that she ditched the firearm. We have 3 that are dead. And so she's like, so one of those is self-defense. And he's like, have you killed any sect members? And Bridget just starts to lose it. She's like, do you understand what's going on? Do you understand this is a conspiracy to undermine this habitat? And Bonner points out, like, he has the opposite problem. He thinks that all this is absolutely true, but he doesn't think this is the end. He thinks that this is the tip of the iceberg to something even more powerful and complex and stranger underneath all of this, and that this is just the start of things. And Bridge is like, so you think that this all leads to a giant space god demon that will hatch from the sun like an egg? And Bonner's like, you say it like it's a joke, and it is. It's just not a funny one. Which again tells you a lot about Bonner. We learn, even though we've only seen Bonner for a couple pages now, we're already developing a personality around this guy.
And well, he also, I think, adds on a bit about you say it like that, but also there's fear in your voice from it. So he like specifically pinpoints that in it too.
Right. And then she makes the quip of like, what, they review hire psychologists now? And he's like, yes, actually. He's like, well, shit. And that's what she said. She says, well, Brink. But you clearly tell that she's probably going to say that. And
that means I could have a job there if I jump to that future.
Yeah, see, there you go. And so Bridge kind of half accepts Bonner's idea. It's like, basically, we didn't expect to be living in tin cans floating around our dead planet. Nothing's ridiculous. Nothing has the power to shock. And What's interesting is that she says, well, Brink, and then she talks about this stuff. And then Bonner says, the Brink, you mean our condition of life. I thought you were referring to Brinkman. And she doesn't correct or agree with him. And so her thought process could be her brain went to how crazy their life is, and that therefore a giant space god is not entirely an unscary prospect. But she could also be her going, I've seen Brink. I've seen something I can't explain. And therefore that leads me to realize that there may be other things that I can't explain. And it's not clear which thought process she's going for. And both of them are valid thought processes, right? It's like neither of them are like right or wrong. It's just, but because of the blending of Brinkman's nickname and the name of the condition you live in is an interesting way of playing with that intentional duality. And of course, also the name of the comic on some level, right? And then they get interrupted because there's a communication, and they found out that there was a communications problem, and Mercury just went dark, like it's not there anymore. And that's where book 1 ends, as everyone's scrambling to check their tracelets and check screens to find out what happened to Mercury. Which, again, we will not discuss in book 1.
Now you're just making it sound like even though they're probably going to, even though I think book 2's title has Mercury in it, it's not going to be about Mercury. They're going to go do something else for an entire book. And then book 3 will be about Mercury. That's the feel I'm getting now from this team.
Without spoilers, I will say that what happens. So let me take a step back. At the very beginning of this, I had mentioned that there's some mysteries that aren't resolved yet. The mysteries aren't resolved yet, but other mysteries are. And that's one of them. Mercury going dark is something that's kind of becomes a background detail. It's a concern, but it's something that gets referenced a lot, and it's not something that they necessarily dig into a ton right away. You're right. What happened to Mercury is an inciting incident for book 2, but they don't go to Mercury to investigate. It's more just, it's like a country got nuked kind of thing.
Hey, Eddie. Hey, Eddie. Do you know that Babylon 4 disappeared mysteriously and nobody knows?
It is a bit like that, yes. Except for then the show actually says, let's make this weird dumbass time loop that actually explains why Babylon 4 disappeared, and it's just like, okay.
Well, it's because unfortunately the original lead actor had to leave, so they needed a way to bring him back in.
I know. And I mean, JMS has often said that, like, a lot of, while he knew the core plot of Babylon 5 from the beginning, he left himself a lot of what do you call skip hatches, exactly like that. So a lot of stuff was just, I'll throw in a plot detail that it might be cool backgrounds, or it might be something you can use later, and then he used some of those escape hatches for exactly that kind of stuff. So I mean, like, yeah, I'm joking about it, but like also that was an intentional design choice of his. Is okay, I now have this weird thing I can then pull on to explain something else.
And no offense to that actor, but there's no way that he could have pulled off the Bruce Boxleitner that we got for 4 seasons.
No. Anyway, so that is book 1 for Brink. This was your first time reading it. What do you think at the end of it?
I enjoyed it. It made me want to buy the second one so I could read it. But I was like, wait, what if we decide to do it for the podcast? I will not purchase it. I will live in limbo at least for a week while I decide if I want to break down and get it.
I mean, I'm not going to say one or the other, but I really enjoy Brink. Like I said, Brink was the serial that got me to get a subscription in 2080. And then I went back and bought the digital back issues, or the collections, I should say, pretty quickly. I'm debating buying them again physically. That's how much I enjoy the series.
Wow.
But yeah, no, it's I really do enjoy it, because part of the reason why I like it is it is something that is distinctly British comics. This is not a story that American comics would do, right? It would be hard to imagine Marvel or DC doing something like this. There are some American indie companies that are like, I could say maybe Image doing something like this, maybe, but um, it's the long form structure, the slow teasing out week to week, the weird combination of slow pace but also regular cliffhangers. It is just very distinctive, and it can get your hooks into you. It has a few problems. Like one of the downsides is because it's constantly teasing. Um, there are things that keep going. It's very Claremontian long game in that regard, and we love the Claremontian long game in retrospect. But I could not imagine have been a month to month reader of Claremontian long game. It probably drove me nuts. Like,
Nope.
it's been 4 years. Would you please solve this plot line?
And the other part about it, though, is it gets to the point where just if it constantly feels like nothing but a tease, you will lose interest because your frustration will overtake everything else.
Right. But again, one thing I do like is that each book does have an ending. Like, so they were here to investigate an up and coming emerging cult. They found it, and also a conspiracy unrelated to that cult, but was still connected to that cult, and solved that problem. So, like, the key mystery they were there to solve got solved in that regard. So, like, it's not just endlessly one thing after another, right? Like, there is a resolution in each book. It's just that they invite so many different tantalizing views of, like, I mean, there's the obvious one of, like, is melancoloma real? Is melancoloma just a mass hallucination? It does seem like right now it's somewhere between the two. That's where the comic seems to have landed, but it's still open for interpretation in a very cool way. Brink has definitely changed as a character, so, like, where does she go from here? Is it open? Which again, like, I think is interesting. Um, Obviously, the titular Brink, which, as you pointed out, I was trying to keep it vague initially, but, like, is the comic name? The comic clearly is not named after Brink, but still, the shock of having a character that you thought was the titular character comic actually not being that was a surprise, but fun. So it is definitely a comic that is willing to engage with stakes, right? And another minor spoiler I will actually mention is Bonner becomes a long running character. So this is not the last you see of Bonner by a wide stretch of the imagination. Bonner becomes pretty heavily involved in things going forward. So this book is in also a lot of ways set up for future books, which is, again, great. So it's, I don't know. I love Brink. That's one of the reasons why I want to talk about it. It's one of the reasons why I think it's a great comic.
I'm glad you suggested it. I'm like, it was a really good read. If you had not suggested, I would have never have read it, and now I'm glad I did.
Excellent. Those are the best kinds, right? Because it's I wouldn't have done this, and now I have.
So I don't know if people want us to cover the next book, they should definitely let us know. Maybe I would have breakdown already bought it. Maybe I won't. Who knows?
Yes.
You'll just have to live on the brink.
And also, if there's other 2080 stories you want us to cover or other comics, definitely let us know, because hopefully with this we've kind of shown that we're not just here to talk about 70s Marvel comics. Like, we do have other interests, and we're excited about other kinds of comics, but without the direction, we will never really go to Bronze Age Marvel, because that is kind of our sweet spot.
But Eddie, Blade's a bad mother. That's all I'm gonna
Just
say.
shut your mouth. So are the West Coast Avengers, which you keep joking about possibly talking about one day.
You didn't say it right, Eddie. It's the West Coast Avengers. Dun dun dun. So any fans of Geek History Lesson will get that one. That's just for y'all.
Good for you.
And with Wonder Man airing, Eddie, I feel like we should cover the West Coast Avengers, or nay, I will want to break out that 90s Wonder Man run that Wonder Man his own solo comic for like 20-something episodes. I own all of them. They're upstairs. They're not good, but I liked Wonder Man as a character.
Yeah. Wonder Man is definitely one of those characters that, like, is really good in team books, but doesn't always do great in solo comics.
Yeah, and this is before Wonder Man went through all the other stuff. So it was, no, we might have to do that now just to torture you.
Oh no, I have to read more Marvel comics. Whatever shall I do? So, Chris, if people wanted to talk to you into doing Brink Volume 2 or Wonder Man, or even, dare I say, the Hawkman miniseries, or the Hawkeye miniseries from the 80s, where are they found you online?
You mean when Hawkeye goes up against Trickshot, or is that the Marvel 2-in-1 where Hawkeye This is how much Marvel Comics is
Right,
wasted in my
right.
brain matter. If you want to come talk about comics, you can do it in the Darker Hue Discord, or on Blue Sky at Darker_Hue, or I'm still floating around Dice Camp occasionally in rare
Yeah,
moments. What about
there
you?
you go. Definitely, you can find me on the Darker Hue Discord. We always happy to talk about genres or speechless there. But yeah, otherwise you can find me on Blue Sky, that pugstudy.com. That's where I'm on Blue Sky. It's also my website if you want to buy any of my stuff. And with that, because we're dropping this in, we don't know what the next episode is, so you'll find out next week. And we'll see you then.